practice, as Sonia was saying. Get used to telling your story, because your story, your lived experience, your personal experiences, that is going to be your personal brand. Nobody's coming to me to hear what I think of D&I as a name something I'm not, right?
Absolutely.
When you come to me, you're getting Alyssa, who's, half Welsh, half Nigerian. I grew up in the Philippines and the States and Tunisia and the UK. And, I bring all of these energies, all of these cultures with me into the work that I do in these different viewpoints.
Welcome to the LMF Network podcast. My name is Sonia Barlow, the host, CEO and founder. This podcast is all about building our careers and confidence with a mission to build the careers and confidence of 25,000 people by 2025 through mentoring, masterclasses, and meaningful connections. For us, this podcast is about sharing stories, highlighting incredible figures, learning about their career journeys, how they overcome failure, rejection, and imposter syndrome, what we can do to build our confidence, be our biggest cheerleaders, and really define as well as achieve our version of success.
So on this podcast, at least the first 10 episodes, I'm inviting my nearest and dearest to have the conversations and make sure that we're really having those honest, transparent conversations that we have behind the scenes in front of the screen. So today I have my friend Alyssa with me, and we're going to be talking all things confidence, all things careers, and all things just smashing it, knowing that we have the capabilities within us. Alyssa, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Do you like my introduction?
The introduction was great. I'm feeling pumped.
I am ready. How do you like the fact that LMF have now turned into a podcast?
I'm so excited. I've been waiting for this.
Have you?
Yeah, because I feel like we always have great conversations, whether it's working on projects together, whether we're doing cheeky LinkedIn lives, when we're meant to be co-working.
TikTok. We did a TikTok
once. Oh, that's right.
And it worked out really well.
I got 2.5 marriage proposals. No complaints.
And a couple of followers on LinkedIn.
That's true.
It's about driving those leads. So Alyssa, what is it that you do and how did you get into your career?
Good questions. So I work in diversity and inclusion, which I mostly work in within tech. And how did I get into it? Well, when I first started working in startups and in tech generally, I was working in marketing and communications and product. And one of the things that I noticed working in, especially like in software companies, was that, oftentimes I was the only woman, or oftentimes the only person of color. And, we love that intersectionality vibe. So these are things that as we can all contain multitudes, these aren't things that I contain separately, right? I'm always me, girl, me, black, mixed race. And I think I just kind of I felt frustrated that there weren't more people that look like me, more people that look like you in the spaces that I was working in. So then I decided to continue to work in the space, but instead of focusing just on communications and brand and PR and things like that, but to actually look at the quote unquote diversity problem. So now that's what I do. I go into companies like Airbnb, companies like Stella McCartney, you name it, wherever the need is, SoundCloud, and do things like workshops, talk about privilege, bias, how we can mitigate and find and fight our bias in our different processes, whether that's recruitment, the products and services that we're building, our brand comms as well, and the link between teasing out, what really gets in the way of building inclusive teams.
I think there's a lot of terms that we've used there. So I'm just going to break down the terms a little bit.
Please do.
What is diversity and what is inclusion?
Oof.
This is not a test. But brands are watching.
But I'm sweating.
Companies.
I'm sweating a little and it feels like a test.
Absolutely. But the thing is, you're living and breathing this, right?
Yeah.
But you also mentioned that after university, you went into marketing and then you went into diversity and inclusion. Now, if I'm being really honest, the reason I'm asking these questions is because though I work in the space, until about 2019, 2020, I didn't even know that there was a space to work in this.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. I see what you mean. So in terms of what these words mean to me, when I think of diversity, I think of like the cultural differences that we have between us, whether we're talking about different genders, for example, different sexualities, different ages, abilities, neurodiversities, religions, accents, class. There's so many different aspects of our identity that can contribute to this kind of idea of diversity or idea of difference. And I think when it comes to inclusion, basically one of the ways I guess I could explain it is it's a bit like that. I wish I knew who said it because I feel like I should,
The party quote?
Yeah.
Vernon Myers from Netflix.
Here we go. See, this is why you have the podcast. This is why I'm sweating, not passing the test, people.
No, it's
Look
not a
sharp.
test. It's more like, do you know what it is? I love being in the diversity inclusion space. And for those who don't know, one of the reasons as to why we founded LMF was because we wanted to make sure that we were supporting people and bridging the skills gap and understanding that they had the capabilities to move into the ladder, on the ladder, above the ladder, and then jump off the ladder when they wish, right? Because there's that corporate ladder analogy that you're kind of given since you were young.
Yeah.
But I have to admit that I didn't know there was a space, and nor did I know that I was diverse or that companies needed to be inclusive until I walked into the workspace. I remember walking in as a graduate, had my business studies degree, I had my first job role. I was like, I am ready, I'm hungry. Oh my God, I'm a graduate. I've made it, I walked in on my first day. If anything, I was early on my first day because I was so keen.
Yeah.
Right? I remember they were like, can you start on this day? I was like, of course I can start on that date, not knowing I could negotiate or I could push it back because you're afraid that you're going to lose that job. So I went into work 90 minutes earlier than I should have. And I was like, if I'm in late, maybe they'll just let me go straight away. So I'm just not going to go. I already had that fear of what if I don't fit in and what if I'm not one. But it was never based on my identity. It was based on the fact that I was a graduate and I didn't have the experience. That's all it was. And then I walked in and they were like, you're a woman. You're a brown woman. You're a young brown woman. You're a young British Asian brown woman with this, that, and the other. And I was like, no, I'm just Sonia. And it really took me aback a little bit. And there was one incident where, I kid you not, we were having a team meeting and randomly they stopped the meeting halfway and they were like, look, we all want to ask you a question. I was like, that's super weird, but go on. They were like, why is your surname Barlow? And I was like, how is this relevant to what we are doing?
It isn't.
How is it relevant to the team meeting? Why is your surname XYZ? That's not cool. And I think that's my point, is I didn't really know it existed until I was a part of the problem and I was a part of the solution.
Yeah, I hear you. And I think that we don't always think of ourselves like that, and that's okay too. But I do think that, as long as you're comfortable, I think it kind of is okay on either side. Because I remember there was a time when I was kind of what is the point of ERG, ESG type groups, or
so employee resource groups or employee support groups?
Yeah. Especially, I understood the ones that were around well-being and mental health. Also, my background's in psychology and gender, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But so I've always had a soft spot for things like that. But I didn't always understand why some companies had a black at, a brown at, a Muslim at, whatever, gay at, or LGBTQI plus at. And now the older I get, the more I'm like, wow, maybe can we have even more groups? These groups are great. Because
do you think groups actually help inclusion?
Ooh, this is a different question.
Yes. Do you think they help inclusion, or are they by their own design quite divisive?
I think it depends on who's asking and who's telling, and rather than me answering just from my subjective opinion, I'd say talk to the people that are in these groups, right? So
you're in this group?
Yeah.
You fit into a bunch of groups, my friend.
That's true.
You've been trying to tell us as well. You're like, I'm all of these things.
That's true. There's a lot of groups.
Exactly. So which group do you fit into and which group do you not fit into? And when you're in the workspace, the reason I ask this question is because these conversations are amplified within the workspace, but they're even more amplified on social media right now.
Oh, of course.
And so if you're a young professional watching this, and if you're thinking of changing your careers, or if you're just feeling a bit stuck, or if you're a white dude who's like, I didn't even know that this conversation existed and I'm trying to learn, this is the spot in which we can teach them. But there's a lot of labels that we hold, and a lot of labels that are given to us, and a lot of labels that if we start to explore, unfortunately you can't come back from. And I think it can be quite a messy ground as well.
Oh, it's absolutely messy. I mean, I think in 5 minutes time, I'm probably going to get cancelled. The space is moving so fast. Even just a conversation around pronouns, wasn't necessarily a conversation we were having in the workplace previously. And now it's, up on everybody's Zoom screens. So I think while I'm excited about, progress and the changes that have been made, I completely get what you're saying about things being really, really messy. And back to your previous point or question about what these groups mean and, are they divisive? Why do we have them? Should these groups be cancelled, yay or nay? I think for me, there can be a sense of community within these groups, which is great. And if we want to look at it from maybe a more negative angle, or maybe not negative, but maybe critical angle, and being is it divisive? Sure. But if the world already is, and we're just trying to meet people where they are and make them feel comfortable, make them feel included, make them feel welcome, and help them understand how they can advocate for themselves within their group, within a company, I think that can be a really, really powerful tool. And to the white guy, unnamed white guy you mentioned earlier, or allies, I think it's great when allies work with these groups as well, because it's okay for certain spaces to not be for you, but it's also okay to, not lose the lesson and the learning and listen to what these groups are saying, whether you're, allowed at the dinner for that group that night or you're hearing about it through something else. But I do think it's important to, what happens inside these spaces for the groups they're for can be really magical, but also what kind of like allies and people around these groups do to amplify their points can be really magical as well. So I guess I see it as less divisive and more an opportunity to recognize that, we're not all getting the same shake at things.
And we're all getting the same piece of the pie. Or a piece of the pie to begin with.
Yeah.
Or if we do get pie, it'll be different flavors.
Yeah, some like it sweet, some like it spicy.
Yeah, or it's not like gluten-free. Or dairy-free. Like, I know it's a silly thing, right? But I used to work in a workspace. And they'd be like, oh, we're going to give you free breakfast.
Ooh.
I was like, obviously. I was like, yeah, I'm definitely going to work
Porridge
here.
with brown sugar?
Yeah. I was
Again?
I was like, I'm definitely going to work here because if you know me, I love free stuff.
Yeah,
so I was like, yeah, of course I'm going to take this job. So I used to come in like half an hour early just because I got free breakfast.
Oh.
Is it odd though?
I would.
Yeah, but that's like one way that they can capture you.
I know.
Okay, so
I'm so bad
I
for
was
stuff
a little
like
bit
that.
captured, that's okay. But I guess my point being is like, they were like, we're going to give free breakfast. Then they only had like white bread, they had strawberry jam, they had butter, they had normal milk. And they had porridge and Nutella and peanut butters. Great. And I was like, but what about people who can't have normal milk?
Yeah.
Oh no, we can't afford non-dairy milk. And I was like, but that's not cool because you've said that everyone gets free breakfast. But what about the people who can't have the items that you've offered due to dietary reasons or
That's
their own
not everyone.
requirements? So then everyone's not included.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's small things like this where I started realizing that I was passionate about these topics.
Yeah.
These like really tiny nuances in my life normally revolved around food. Where I was like, but that's not cool because not everyone's getting the same thing. Or I was in another workspace, where we went out for a client dinner. And now if you're working in the workspace, client dinners, expense dinners, they sound like fun to begin with. And I remember when I went to my first, I was like, you're going to expense my meal? I can eat as much as I want. Honestly, people are going to be watching this being like, do you not get enough food? I was like, I do, but these are the small things that make me happy, right?
Yes.
Like expense trips, expense travel, like meals, whatever. Anyway, so we got there and they had nothing for me to eat. And I was like, why would you not have like a vegetarian option? Oh, because someone didn't raise their hand. No, but that's just common sense. It's common sense to make sure that there is something vegetarian there. And my point being is when we think about diversity and inclusion, I feel like a lot of it is common sense. And sometimes I go into businesses and I'm looking at you all being like, so you're paying me to teach you common sense? I'll take your money. That's fine. I need that money. But basically that's what it is how can you not be thinking these things for yourself? How can you not be listening to your people that are already raising these remarks? How can you not have the awareness? Like, how are you so tunneled visioned and so narrow in your approach that you think because this fits this group, it's going to fit every group, when we know that just from a basic human requirement that it doesn't make sense.
I think that's a perfect metaphor. I always confuse metaphor and analogy. So if we've got any like English language,
We will. There'll be
English,
like in our comments.
English
like,
lit.
you got that wrong.
Slide into those DMs, honeys, and let us know in the comments.
I think it's an analogy.
I think it's an analogy. Let's roll with that. Yeah, take two. So that's a really interesting analogy, Sonia, for privilege, right?
Yeah.
Because that's kind of how it works, right? The more of it that you have.
That, by the way, was not a fake laugh. I actually just have a cold. It wasn't like I have a cold. I don't want to laugh over the head like the speakers.
I don't care if you're faking it. As long as you're smiling at me, I'm like, I'll take
it. It was a real laugh, but I don't want to like laugh over the mic because I don't feel that great. But go for it. Privilege.
But yeah, I think that's a good analogy.
Yeah.
For privilege. Little privilege 101 session, folks. Because, the more of it that you have, the less of it that you're able to see. So I think that we see it sometimes with food so I think I kind of agree with you, but I also don't agree with you a little bit when we talk about like what's common sense, because I feel like it kind of comes back to my earlier sentiment about how even within the DEI, it's like 1 minute to the next. I don't even know my job is going to be called in 5 years' time. You know what I mean? But I feel like it is changing really, really, really fast. And even conversations we were having about like abilities and disabilities, now we're having bigger conversations about neurodiversity, which is great, but do you know what I mean? So I feel like the space and the field is widening. So that sense of whether it's a common sense or not so common sense, that subject matter is is multiplying really, really, really fast. And I think some people do get left behind. And also not everybody's working in the space in the way that we are. So
okay, but on that point, how do you get into this space? Now, I asked that question because I receive a lot beautiful messages on like LinkedIn and now TikTok, now on YouTube even, being like, how do you get into the D&I space? Can you tell us how to get into it? Can we have a 15-minute call with you? And I'm like, I can. But honestly, I also don't know how I got into this space. It's not like there was a career pathway. It's not like there's a degree on it. And also I don't know if I agree with there being a degree on it. So that's a different conversation. But I think for me, there's lived experience and earned experience.
Yes.
I think for me, there's lived privilege and earned privilege. And I think in my kind of story, let's say career story, was I worked in tech, but actually I was in the D&I space before that even. My dissertation was on something around diversity and inclusion before it was therefore a term. It was the perceptions of non-conformity and its impact on employability. Which sounds like really, heavy right now, but it was, well, if I walked to a job interview in the finance industry and I had an eyebrow piercing or a nose piercing or really bright colors and I was wearing all tattoos, how would you perceive me? Because originally it was the perception era. And that was when dating apps were coming out. So everything was just swipe right or swipe left based on what people look like. And then I walked into the tech world and I just kind of became an imposter, which we'll touch on, but I didn't know there was anything around inclusion. What I thought about was, how do I get more school kids looking like me into this space? How do I get more women to the table? Actually, we're creating products for X, Y, Z. Why are they not in the decision rooms or in the boardrooms? And then eventually when I was unfortunately laid off from 2 jobs, I was like, well, hold on. I've launched LMF as a brunch club. I formed a community. I have my own confidence. I know where the gaps are. Let me do something around this. And I used my consultancy skills to start whatever it is that we now do. And that's okay. But it's the skills that I really transferred. So when people ask me how to get into the space, I'm like, okay, but why do you want to get into the space? What value are you adding? What skills do you think you can transfer? Right now, is it for clout or is it for actual impact? Is it because you want to change the ways that things are done? Or is it because you think it's really cool and trendy for you to be here and it's hot right now and you're like, I can make a quick buck? Because there are some people who are just trying to make a quick buck. And I think eventually we're all going to see those people.
I hope so.
I hope so too. So when, there'll be people listening being like, okay, well, Alyssa, it sounds really cool what you do and I'm really interested and I want to work with these big brands and teach them how to be more inclusive and more equitable. Great. So Alyssa, how do you get into the EDI, D&I, IDE, diversity inclusion space?
How do you get into it? My top tips would be joining communities like LMF. And this isn't a shameless plug, people.
It is. It is, and it should be.
It is a shameless plug.
No, but it isn't. Absolutely. I mean,
but I think getting into communities like LMF, there's a lot of other communities out there, which I won't name because we are on LMF's podcast. But I would say, find your tribe, find the tribes that are out there, or even using platforms like Meetup or Eventbrite, like
LinkedIn, even Instagram now.
Exactly. There's so many different meta search engines that you can just type in whatever keywords you're looking for, like diversity and equity or inclusion and ageism or whatever it is that, you really want to get into or really want to learn more about or widen out your network or your expertise or your frame of, knowledge about. That's one of the things that helped me in the beginning was just going to events. I remember meeting you at an event on diversity and mixed reality that LMF was running like years and years ago. Remember?
Yes. No,
so it was
obviously I remember when I met you, Alyssa. How can I forget? We did a Women in VR event in September 2019.
Yeah, it was VR, AR, and MR.
Yeah, which was literally the month where I lost my job. And so no one could see it, but I was in pain and hurting.
Yeah.
But I already planned this event. So I was like, well, I need to show up. And actually,
spoiler alert, she smashed it.
Well,
that event was amazing.
Actually, it was a great event.
It really was.
But also, do you know what happened there was we had someone from a big brand approach us and they were like, this is such a great event you've run. We're looking to get more women in VR. Can you come and give a workshop to our company? And I was like, of course I can. Had I ever given a workshop to a company on that scale before? No.
Not yet.
Not yet. That's the point. But again, I went back to here's the skills that I know. Here's what I'm good at. Here's how I've evidenced that earlier.
Yeah.
Then they were like, what is your budget? And I was like, what is your budget? And they were like, this is our budget, which is like £1,500. I'm like, well, normally my budget is above 2K, but I'm happy to give you a discount. I didn't know what my budget was. I just lost my job, but I didn't even know you could make money out of this, right? So it was a lot of trial and error. I remember, not to cut you off, but people asked, how did you get into EDI space? I make sure that I could evidence what I was doing. There was a report, there was a way to actually deliver the content. I understood my clients' needs, but most importantly, I practiced like 3 weeks straight with people being like, this is the workshop I'm going to deliver. What's the key takeaways? Do you understand it? And I talked to my mentors. So I'm really grateful that you remember that LMF event.
Oh yeah, like it was yesterday.
Also, I sometimes forget stuff that we've done, right? Because it was a different time, but also I think I felt a little bit braver then than I do now, which is kind of weird.
Ooh.
But anyways, we'll get back to...
We're going to come back to that because we want you to be your bad, brave self.
I am. This is the LMF podcast. But I think it's the point of when you shoot your shot to begin with and you start something, you've got nothing to lose. And then when you start establishing yourself, there's a lot more responsibilities and burdens. So you have to make sure that you're really kind of, leveling yourself constantly.
Yeah. But before we get to that, just because some people that you referred to before might be not worried about that just yet because they're still trying to get into it. Absolutely. So for people that are out there hustling, trying to figure it out, I'd say keep doing what you're doing. Definitely check out as many communities as you can. And as I say, like find your tribe, find those spaces that you can be yourself in, that you can be vulnerable in, where there's people like you, whether they are also starting out in diversity and inclusion or whether they just come from communities that you represent that feel good to you. Because that is diversity and inclusion as well, right? It's not like a rose by any other name would still be as sweet. We had to get a Shakespeare reference in. Now we have, boom.
It's very important.
It's very important. So I would say, check out different communities, see what's out there. Get practice, as Sonia was saying. Get used to telling your story, because your story, your lived experience, your personal experiences, that is going to be your personal brand. Nobody's coming to me to hear what I think of D&I as a name something I'm not. Right.
Absolutely.
When you come to me, you're getting Alyssa, who's, half Welsh, half Nigerian. I grew up in the Philippines and the States and Tunisia and the UK. And, I bring all of these energies, all of these cultures with me into the work that I do in these different viewpoints. And if somebody's working with you, you bring in
absolutely
all the extra aloha that you bring in.
But my question to you is, and maybe this is more of a...
Also mentors. That's another thing I'd recommend.
Mentors, absolutely. And we'll get onto that. My question is, we've spoken, I think, a lot about being outwardly in the D&I world, but I think there are jobs roles that you can do behind the scenes that don't mean that you have to be delivering workshops. And maybe that's something we can debunk right now is working in the diversity and inclusion world is not just about delivering workshops and sharing your piece, because actually that itself is very exhausting 100%. And causes a lot of burnout, and constantly you're living certain traumas that you've gone through in the workspace. Yes. So what are other ways that people can get involved?
This is a really good question. So I would say that no matter what you're doing in D&I, whether it's workshops, whether it's strategy, people policy, roadmaps, inclusive practices, or anything else, I would say always remember that if you're trying to pour into anybody else's cup, honey, you got to make sure there's something in your cup first, right? Otherwise, cue burnout. But I think some of the ways that we can work behind the scenes are, some people work in data analysis, for example, and they're sifting through, information on demographics within big companies using SQL. So there's so many different ways that you can parse this data, so to speak. And those parameters don't just need to be in the format of a workshop, because you're absolutely right. It can very much involve reliving your trauma or just having really, really difficult, should rebrand to courageous conversations. But, talking about this stuff, especially as in the skin that we're in and in the spaces that we move through, where we're oftentimes the only in the room, that can take a bit of a toll. And at one point, it's like, I don't mind, because I'm trying to leave the workplace better than I found it. That's why I've done more than 500 workshops on these topics over the last couple of years alone. But burnout can be very, very real. So I would recommend finding other ways that you can engage with this as well. And it doesn't have to just be your face, your voice. It can also be your research.
Your research, your solutions, what you bring to the table.
Your analysis of impact data.
Exactly. It could be the people, just making sure that you're checking your social media content before it goes out. It could be designing a website that's accessible. It could be being in a position where if you're running a panel with an event that you see the diversity or the mix or the representation of different groups. It could be that actually, every month you have a different culture that you're celebrating in your own workspace. You're in a family group and you're trying new things.
Ideally with food.
Clearly this should just be a food podcast at this point.
Yeah.
Or if you're a sponsor and you're looking to sponsor the LMF podcast and you do food.
Can I come back when that happens?
Absolutely.
Great.
But I think my point being is I always say to people, like, if you want to get into the inclusion diversity space, what are you doing in your everyday to actually get out of your comfort zone? They're like, what do you mean?
Ooh,
I'm
yes,
like, it's
this is a
not
big
just
one.
about your lived experience. It's about what you're doing to actually go challenge yourself. So, okay, not everyone can afford traveling. Cool. Let's not do that. But have you tried new foods, new drinks? Have you gone out and found new friends? Are you reading different articles, going on different news channels, watching different shows? Like, I mean, Netflix to some extent is a godsend. There's so much on there that you can watch. And one thing I really liked on Netflix was this show called Superstore.
Oh yeah.
I really liked it. I thought it was really like funny, but also funny in a way where it's like not really funny. And you're like, these are actually people's lived experiences. I understand. But you can watch shows from different countries and different continents and the way they make it and just learn a little bit. Now, I'm not saying that's the best example. I'm just saying that, what books are you reading? What, audios are you listening to? I think it's more than just, hey, I'm going to put my hand up and I'm going to be a public speaker in this realm. Because not everybody needs to be a public speaker. Actually, it's what are you doing to diversify your own mindset and challenge your own norms and biases around you?
But I love that. And just underline to everything you said. One thing I would recommend, which kind of goes against this a little bit. So while we're talking about, you don't just have to do public speaking, but on that note, one thing I think that's helped me, honestly, maybe I feel like I should be getting like an affiliate link for Eventbrite and Meetup, but these communities really, really, really helped me so much. Especially, as I started to go out on my own and like, do work under my own name and not just like within companies. Because I think that just how you communicate, even just within a kind of meetup setting, can tell other people a lot about you, what you're interested in, how articulate you sound,
But you're touching on networking and introductions.
But I feel like, that was a big thing that helped me out of my comfort zone. That then also was a really helpful introduction towards like how business can be done. So that would be a big unlock that I'd recommend to people as well, is like in terms of trying to push yourself outside of that comfort zone. Yeah, whether it's jumping into threads on Twitter or LinkedIn, or reading things you might not otherwise read, diversifying the content that you consume for sure. So maybe giving, The Guardian and the BBC or whichever platforms we're on a little bit of a break, or saying yes and looking at, I don't know, all Black publications like The Root or feminist publications like Jezebel, just trying to get like other vantage points and hearing about people's lived experiences and stories and struggles that you might not share from those people themselves. Because when you're hearing about it from someone like you, writing about them, we know it's going to be that us and them dynamic where us is inevitably above them.
Absolutely. And earlier you touched on having a good network, running community. You touched on networking, being a part of community, but also mentors. Yeah. So what would your top tips be to people who want to go out to their first networking event but don't have but have never done so before?
Okay, I would say thank you to Zoom. Like if you haven't done an in-person networking event before, that's okay. Try doing one online. I've done that a few times where I've done like networking events on whether it's like Twitch and Discord or just like online ones. And even just getting used to, especially I'm trying to think of like one example in recent years was like, or not that recent, but like the Product School does really good product conferences anyway. And I remember like the first time that I went to one of those, even though it was virtual, or I joined it virtually, I didn't join the first one I went to in person. I was nervous to say, I was like, oh no, what should I say about myself in the chat? Because you can see like 8,000 people are writing in real time. Eventually, I think I just said, hey, I'm a marketing diversity and inclusion consultant. Here's my name. And I put my little like LinkedIn thing. And, and the first time that I had put that job title on my LinkedIn, there was nobody else that had that job title. And now there's so many people that have that job title. So that's another point I would say is like, try something new, be a little bit less afraid of failure, a little bit more excited to figure it out as you be testing in production, and find different spaces where you can test these little sound bites and then try it on for size. And then the next time you go to an event, maybe you'll have like a different elevator pitch or like a different spiel. But remember that like when you're networking and doing events, they don't just have to be in person. You don't have to do the travel thing. Events involve money, they involve your time. So I'd say try something online, try something virtual, get a kind of feel for it, and then put yourself out there more and more, because you never know who you're going to meet at these events. You could meet your next co-founder, could meet your mentor, could meet someone who's going to hire you, or someone you're going to hire, or someone who's going to change your life.
Just going to be your friend, right? Yeah. Like new friends, new communities. And you also spoke about, we touched on it really briefly, and I'm going to keep it really brief because we'll get you on for like a wider episode, but
with
burnout.
Food.
With food. Absolutely. But really, we touched on burnout, we touched on bravery, we touched on just being exhausted. So what I really want to ask is, this is all great and we can do all of these great things which we should be doing and we will be doing. But what about if you need that space to go and recharge your battery? How do you recharge your battery without maybe feeling guilty for not going out and doing things to make that difference or impact? Because I do think, though that's a loaded question, I also think there is a weight on that question, because a lot of individuals are feeling like they either have to do a lot or feeling like, oh, I'm not doing anything, and so I'm not good enough. I don't think there's like a middle ground anymore.
I mean, when you figure out how to not feel that way, you let me know, okay? I think we're all a work in progress. We're all trying to figure that out. So one thing I'd recommend, or a bunch of things, like, why do I always start with one thing and then I'd say 10?
Easy, right? To say one thing.
Right. So a couple of things I would recommend that I do to unwind and refill the cup and avoid burnout is, I'm like a big bubble bath taker. Like, love it. I've recently gotten into bath bombs, varying levels of success with the bath bombs, but generally, even just like the bubbles that I get from, it's like I get the really cheap ones from Lidl, and I get like the family packs, like they last for longer. It's like the fastest thing I go through in my house. It's my bubble bath. So yeah, that works for me. I really like getting in the bath and unwinding as we approach Pisces season. You know, be a little mermaid.
Not me, actually. It's not me. I don't know why I did that.
I'm a Pisces. Anyway, so that would be one thing I recommend. I also read a few books a week. Big reader. And that's another way that I kind of refill my cup. And I think that coming back to your earlier point of like, okay, how do you refill your cup, but also like not feel bad and not feel that constant kind of entrepreneurial guilt of, am I doing enough? Do I deserve this break? I think that, rest is resistance, and you can't pour into other people's cups if there's nothing in yours. So whether it's reading in the bathtub with like a crime thriller or a kink book, or I'm just talking about myself here, but whatever it is that helps you unwind, I would say channel that more. Because one thing I used to do, especially in the beginning of my career journey, and still now actually, to be honest, is like a lot of what I was reading was around like personal development, and always like, how do I level up? How do I level up? How do I upskill? And there's so many good, startup books out there, for example. But I'd say, balance the hustle with rest, So back to that kind of reading example, I try to remind myself, like, it's okay for not everything I'm reading to be about critical race theory or, coaching or something that's, quote, productive or monetizable. It's okay for me to just read for pleasure. So that would be something I would recommend to people, is being honest about the things that you really like, because then, you lose track of time when you're doing it because you're passionate about it.
I mean, talking about time, we've actually come out of time as well.
Oh,
and we have somehow finished. And I don't know how, because I have so many other questions to ask you. But Alyssa, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah.
This for me has been absolutely fascinating. I know I've learned so much. In summary, we've learned about how to get into the world of diversity inclusion, what skills you can be using, how to find new friends and or mentors and communities, why networking is key in your own personal and professional growth, how to relax and not burn out and get exhausted. And most importantly, the importance of just showing up as yourself.
Yes.
I feel like we've covered a spectrum of topics, which basically very few of them were in the script that I sent you, which is great, which means that it's all organic conversation. Yeah. And we are here searching for a food sponsor, which is even better.
Oh, definitely.
Alyssa, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I'm very grateful that you came on. And remember that if you want to hear more conversations, you can like, subscribe and share. www.lmfnetwork.com, at LMF Network across all socials. We have regular podcasts, regular shows, and a mentoring program that you can get involved in. And obviously, Alyssa is my biggest cheerleader. So we also have this book where she's also a contributor, which is fascinating.
That's
Was it
right.
the first book you contributed to?
It wasn't the first book I contributed to.
Well,
but there's a chapter on email marketing, and I talk about how in the connected world, we're largely only ever an email away from everyone in the world. So how are you going to use that position of privilege and use your emails to make them a little less cold and a little bit more warm in your outreach? So check out the book if you haven't already. Check out my chapter.
And how can people connect with you?
Connect with me on LinkedIn.
How do you spell your name?
You spell my name, or I spell my name, Alyssa, and my surname is Ordu. I think it's probably the shortest Nigerian name ever. Everyone's always like, where's the rest of it? I'm like, no, that's my full name.
Well, thank you so much.
Great.
You can learn more about the podcast, get involved and listen via our website, www.lmfnetwork.com. You can follow us across all socials at LMF Network. Remember to like, subscribe, share and tell a friend. Get involved and drop us your comments or questions so that we can make sure that it's really adding value to your lives.